Okay, Scott, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Scott. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm Scott Eustace. I'm in New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm the wetlands specialist, Gulf Restoration Network, nonprofit environmental organization across the 5 states.
Great. Just for future reference, we're getting maybe about 70% of your words, so I'm not sure if it's your headset or whatnot. Okay. Catherine.
So hi everyone, I'm Catherine D'Ignazio. I'm a professor at Emerson College and organizer with Public Lab, and I've been interested in trying to teach my journalism and media art students about how we can use Public Lab sensors to tell interesting stories with data.
Great. Katie.
Hi, my name's Katie. I am also an organizer with Public Lab. I also co-run Kids Hackerspace in Somerville, Massachusetts. And so most of my engagement with Public Lab has been thinking about how to use projects in a teaching context and informal learning environments.
Awesome. I can read from Pupster Bear, who says hi. And is your mic set up? Are you able to talk with us? Okay, no. Pupster Bear can't talk, and it looks like Pei is also here but doesn't have their mic and camera set up today. So we won't be hearing directly from them, but we do hope that you set it up for next month. We'd love to meet you. And then Jeff.
Hey, I'm in a car. I hope you can hear me all right. Signal's going kind of in and out.
Yeah, it's good.
I work at Public Lab. I've been working a lot with Liz and with everyone else here on some of the on-ramp strategies we've been coming up with, like engaging people through Q&A and also through the different sort of activities that people can do as a sort of ladder of participation.
Great. With that, like I know the web working group could probably talk a whole lot more about the kind of features we've been setting up, but I think it will be more awesome to go directly to Katie now to hear what Parts and Crafts has been working on.
Yeah, so we do a lot of informal and formal instruction with kids in different contexts. Most of the way that we have used Public Lab and are really interested in using Public Lab is thinking about how to, as I said, integrate a lot of the activities in a teaching context. And so we've used the Koki, we've done a lot of stuff with the spectrometer. We've done a little bit with some of the wetlands curriculum and the kind of documentation and curricular materials that have come out of that spectrum of projects. And I think one of the things that we are really interested in is thinking about documentation and how different kind of levels of projects can be used to on-ramp people into the Public Lab community. So the Koki is a really good example. It's one of the it's a really great starter project that we've kind of run and done a lot of times, both with kids in our space and within the Public Lab community. And one of the things that I think is really useful about it is that it is both a very good introduction to Public Lab and the kinds of projects that you can do with Public Lab, and it also kind of doubles as a skill building activity to get people comfortable using a tool set that they may or may not use. So for those of you who aren't familiar, it's a pretty simple analog electronic circuit. It uses a 555 timer to basically function as a kind of tone generator. Kind
of what, Katie?
As a tone generator.
A tone generator, okay.
It's one way to use it to test the conductivity of water. And one of the things that that I really, really like about it is that it's a really recognizable circuit, and it's simple enough that you can build it without having a whole lot of previous expertise and without necessarily having a whole lot of access to not like high-end electronics equipment, but like any electronics equipment. Like you can build it with, you know, $5 worth of components. So that is one of the reasons that we like the project and use the project and are interested in thinking about the project. I don't.
So maybe I could ask Catherine, because Catherine, some of your was it graduate media production students have created really amazing how-to and documentation that then Katie and I have recently worked with the weekend before last to kind of get organized into these new activity grids. And I wonder, but because you created the base documents that we've all been using, I wonder if you wanted to say anything about your goals and strategies.
Yeah, sure. So let's see. So I have been for the past couple of years with my journalism students they're undergrad students at Emerson College studying journalism. So like basically they feel very scared of electronics and technology. Well, not technology. They feel comfortable with media technology. But they are like, what's electricity? We do a module in my class on censored journalism, and I've been using the Coquille for the past 2 years to do that. And so like in the process of doing that, I was like, oh, okay, this would be great if there were a guide so that other people could start there's this emerging concept of censored journalism, which is basically just telling stories with censor data, to get other journalism educators started with that. And so one project I started last year with my grad student, Akshaya, is trying to wrap up some of the stuff that I've been doing in the class in a handy like guide. And that's still in progress. And we're hoping to actually publish that as like a little public lab booklet, hopefully soon, of like how to get started with censored journalism.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be totally applicable outside of journalism education specifically, but could go for like any kind of media education, like anyone who's interested in telling stories with censors. But it was based on this idea too that like one of the things that's been a little bit of a hurdle in getting the students ramped up is that we've been having them follow one of the original tutorials that I think Don posted when he was developing the Coquille. And like Katie, like the Coquille, at least for me, was like the easiest of all the public lab tools to get started with, because it's just so simple. Like you can literally put it together in, you know, like 20 or 30 minutes, even with no prior background in electronics, which I also don't have. And so that seemed like a good starting point, but then people are getting tripped up with the tutorial because like the breadboard is inverted and there's a circuit diagram, which that's complicated to read for people that don't understand those. And it's unclear, like there's some missing images and stuff like that. So we decided to try to like clean up that tutorial and make it very accessible for the beginning people that want to come in and just try to put this together from scratch. So how would you make it really like you've just come to this cold and you want to make a Coquille and you want to start to try to measure water conductivity. You might not know how to read a circuit diagram. How do you get started? And so that was like the goal of that. And so actually like the censored journalism guide links to the Coquille tutorial and says, okay, now go to the online public lab site and follow this particular tutorial. And like we're almost there, but that tutorial still, we're putting in some videos. Akshaya is actually shooting some videos this weekend of the Coquille making noise.
Great.
Yeah, she shoots like this beautiful documentation. And then we also want to, I don't know, I'm going to include a parts list somewhere because some of the people are posting about like, what are these actual parts? And, you know, I don't know, thinking about like, what's the best way, I don't know if anyone has thoughts about that actually, but like, what's the best way for these circuits to encapsulate their exact parts list or make it into a little kit or some way that like, it would be very easy for people to acquire all the little parts that if they didn't have them on hand or something.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think we should think about on the webpage, and this is the thing that I don't actually know a whole lot about, but the circuit is basically set by the resistor capacitor values. And this is true. This is actually true in kind of electronics tutorials across the board. It's really easy to grab the wrong components or not have a sense of like the range of components that work in that circuit. And it's the kind of thing that I think is like kind of negligibly easy to troubleshoot if you know something about electronics, and just completely flabbergasting if you don't. And I haven't looked into what like those ranges are, or what the components list would look like. But I think it's one of the things that like I'm really, really excited about the activity grids. I think they're going to be really awesome. I've also like in building the Koki, like, you know, a dozen times or so, like it's really surprising to me how often I trip up and like just grabbing the wrong components and not being able to easily swap them out. And that, because it's such a great on-ramping project, I think it could be a really great example within the activity grids of like the kind of material that needs to be included and posted, and the kind of like resource sharing that would be really great to build in across the board for public lab projects, because a lot of that stuff is not like, it's not hard or complicated, and the expertise is definitely there in the community. But if you don't personally have that expertise, it's really, really frustrating to like be building the simplest circuit that you can build and then have it not work and then not know how to troubleshoot it. Which is one thing I think that having the structure of the activity grids will help to kind of shift that so that people can get that kind of information about various public lab projects.
Let me do two things now. We have a new person. Oh, Patrick, is this you? You're on mute. Can you
This is me.
Okay.
Hey, good to see you all in person, more or less.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I don't think we've ever seen you before. Patrick, extremely active community member. Thank you.
Yeah, it's excited to be working with you guys. Google Hangouts being down and using this new thing is interesting, but yeah, I'm excited to see what the discussion is.
Okay, great. Yeah, definitely have. You know what? I'm going to go to Jeff next, and then I'd like to go to you if you did want to share some of your thoughts about organizing the overall water area that we were emailing about.
Okay.
Let me go to Jeff first. Hey, Jeff, you're on mute right now. But I wonder, just as Katie was, where Katie just now left off talking about, you know, organizing materials, you know, clear lists of components, having, you know, using the activity grids as kind of like a step-by-step way that people can onboard themselves, or, you know, groups can work through the steps. I was just wondering if you wanted to add anything from your perspective on the web working group about activity grids.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many different exciting things about this project or this new workflow. One of them is the sort of tie-in with replication, the idea that, you know, the easiest tasks will be the ones that the most people are able to replicate. And so we'll have the most confidence that they work properly. That's the ideal. And as you work your way up in difficulty, then you get to more complex ones that fewer people have done them. And at a certain point, you reach certain activities, perhaps that no one has successfully achieved or completed. And that's sort of the leading edge. That idea of walking up through the complexity or through the difficulty layers. The other one is I really look forward, we're piloting a lot of these in projects and activities that are somewhat more established in public lab, ones we've been doing for a while. And that's good to try them out. But I look forward to the the moment where we begin writing activities for all kinds of things, like the sort of really well-established, you know, water sampling strategies that, say, Scott might be using, or the, you know, say, hey Scott, or like, you know, different lead contamination tests that are out there already and are well-established, but lack a really clear methodology. That's where I hope we can cross between tools that we're making ourselves and tools that we're just providing better documentation and a more discursive way to learn these skills with other people than are currently out there.
Discursive is not a word I usually use unless I'm talking with other public lab people. But let me just say that I do like that we have a new question and answer feature on the website that is about talking back and forth, and has already, like, in its short period of existence so far, been a place where we could have that, like, discursive development of approaches. And so I'm excited to, like, I guess where I'm very interested in is where do we go from these, like, from the maybe the broadest environmental questions that people might be coming to a community like Public Lab to ask, to try to get orientation within, and then using a discursive, a call and response model of going through sharing approaches and gradually, like, honing in on, like, okay, so it seems like here's an activity we need to develop. And I just wanted to talk through that because I can kind of feel that as a way that new project areas could be developed.
Yeah, I mean, this is Katie, kind of jumping in. I mean, I think even at a more basic level, like, I feel like there are probably a lot of people who float around the public lab community without really engaging in conversations, in part because without, like, a clear kind of scaffolded way to have those conversations, it's really, really hard. There's, like, so much information, and it's really hard to know kind of where to step in and what level the conversation, like, on thinking about research notes specifically, where to insert yourself, especially if you're new to the project and trying to get a handle on what you're even doing. And so one of the things that I think, and the Koki's a good example, because it's a project where the most common stumbling blocks are questions that are, like, kind of trivially easy to answer. But if you aren't connected to a set of people who can easily answer them, it's really easy to just spend a huge amount of time not knowing what you're doing wrong. I
resemble that remark, Katie.
Yeah, and so one of the things that would be really great is if, it's about kind of how communities build habits and practices around, like, how they talk to each other.
That's nice, yeah.
And if, like, there's all of this kind of discourse around expertise within the public lab community, but I think one of the things that makes a distributed, like, kind of internet-based community of people who are building things together really powerful is being able to easily share expertise that people do have. And so both the Q&A format and the activity grid format, where there's an assumption of replication, like, there's an assumption that even if it's a really basic project, people are going to try to do it, and there are other people who are, like, paying attention to how it goes, or can be asked, like, how it's going. That it's, like, such a important kind of basic expectation to set, and it lays the groundwork for conversations to be able to happen that will both improve the tools, but will also build the community so that the people in it can be better activated as resources.
All right, thank you, Katie. We have a lot of heads nodding. I don't know if you can see that. And I wanted to go to Patrick, who's been thinking about the riffle and maybe, the idea of the whole open water area, which I know Catherine has been active on. Since there was an open water, Catherine was in that group. So yeah, Patrick.
All right. Neat. Well, first I would like to say, for the question and answer and for the activities, something I've noticed is that the discussion group on Google Groups has been used for that question and answer purpose before. And that idea of sharing expertise has been one of the best parts of Public Lab for me, is noticing that happening. People from all over the world saying, you guys look like you know what you're doing. I'm trying to do this. What lessons might you have? So it would be really neat for those types of discussions to get onto the website where somebody just happening upon Public Lab for the first time can see that kind of discussion going on, rather than it being behind in Google Groups where it's a little bit more hidden. So that part, I don't know if that's what you guys have thought of, but I'm really excited about that. The other thing about activities is a lot of times people have posted the great work that they've been doing, and it's great to see. And a lot of times I've thought, how would I begin to do this on my own? And I like Jeff's idea. There'll be some things that are going to be very difficult for people to do, and maybe nobody will have replicated them yet. But doing them as activities, like if somebody posts a great research note, like Ben Hickman's conductivity probe that he made recently, for the idea to be, now that this is here on the site, it could be an activity, maybe people would be interested in replicating it. To me, that's really interesting and pretty neat, because the more people that do it, the more different use cases there are, and the more robust it can be with different people using it for their own needs. As far as organization goes, my overall feeling was that there's a lot of different reasons that people are interested in open water, different things that they want to measure. And when you first arrive on Public Lab, you can tell that there's something called a riffle, and you can see that there's stuff happening, but it's hard to get a sense of the big picture. What is open water? And I don't myself know what that big picture is really. There's the Koki and the riffle, but somebody who just arrives there and wants to go to like the project page and see what's happening, what is the best way to organize that? And I don't know that I have the answers, but I'm interested in seeing what other people think. So yeah, what do other people think?
This is Catherine. I agree in the sense that I think it's really hard to get in and know all the richness, like when you're just kind of coming across Public Lab as a website or whatever. So I really like that I do agree, like the activities and the activity grid seems really exciting. I did have one comment about the activity grid. I'm actually looking at it right now. I guess I have a question about, like, if we're going to rate things by difficulty, then everything can't be easy because there has to be something that's different, right?
You know what?
So,
you're not the only person who's looked at that, looked at me, and raised their eyebrows. Bronwyn, who is professionally a librarian as well as like a fabricator and educator, she was like, who came up with easy, medium, and hard? Like, no one does that. And so yeah, let's put a pin in those estimations being a little bit off, and then but I guess your point was also that, yeah, are they all labeled easy at this point?
Well, they're all easy right now. Some of them don't have labels. I mean, I actually don't have a problem with easy, medium, hard, because I think it's nice to say, like, there are different levels of difficulty, and to acknowledge that, and I think that's fine, and like that. But I think the ones we label easy should legit be super easy, you know, because like I think that there's be a quick way to turn people off by calling something easy, but then like you have a really hard time trying to do it, and then you're like, oh, I'm dumb, I don't fit in here or whatever. So so I think maybe just paying a little bit of attention to how we rate those, and like for who. You know, I mean, I always am thinking of my students. So it's like some things might be really easy for, I don't know, like somebody who has a background in electronics. Like, oh yeah, I get it. Like there's a circuit diagram. I can put this together in 20 minutes. Whereas like my journalism students would just look at it and it would be like gobbledygook or whatever. So maybe we think about who we're rating it for.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I think for the Koki, I mean, my recollection, and I'm like trying to fix my screen, so I'm not actually looking at the Koki thing right now. But I mean, my recollection is that a lot of the stuff that's on that page is are activities that are directly related to the Koki. with like a couple of related, like this is how it ties into the Ripple, which is a different project. I mean, I think like I mean, part of the reason why the Koki registers as a project that should be marked easy is because it's very closely related to like the set of starter projects for anybody who's starting in electronics. And so one of the things that would be really cool, I mean, I agree that one thing that would be neat in that regard is to put some of that context in there to be like, oh, if you are doing this project, here are some other resources, whether or not they're on the Public Lab website, as to like how 555 timer circuits work and what they're supposed to do. Because I think once it kind of gets tied into that set of that like slightly wider context, like people have access to more resources to better understand the circuit, but it also kind of helps people kind of link in and develop, kind of train themselves in like how to find those wider resources. I mean, I agree. Like, and if you've never looked at a circuit diagram, trying to follow the circuit diagram for the Koki is like totally confusing because you have no idea what the components are or what they're supposed to do. But at the same time, like one of the things that we want to be doing in on-ramping is making it okay for things to like be for like first tries to go wrong. And that's part of why the Koki's nice. It's like kind of simple enough to be able to follow it through step by step. But it's complicated enough that you feel really, really satisfied when you put it together and it works. And so I think that, and it is interesting, and it's weird because so many of the Public Lab projects are not analog electronics projects. And so if you're like, it's not like we're developing like a series of kind of project sets in that direction. Like the Koki's not necessarily going to help you figure out how to do aerial mapping or how to, set up the air quality monitors or any of the rest of it.
Yeah.
But it is a project that can get people started in a particular track where, future Public Lab projects like could easily kind of go down that track of kind of borrowing from analog electronics kind of frameworks to modify them and do the things that we want them to do. So I think the thing that I would want from the activity grid, or maybe from like the research note or whatever is around the Koki, is thinking about like that wider context. And like it's easy because it's cheap, and it's easy because if you want to read a circuit diagram, it's a pretty it's one of the easier circuit diagrams to follow. And then we can maybe put in some context about thinking about how you can use that information to do similar kinds of projects or something like that. I'm not exactly sure.
Katie, if we can build on what you were saying and also keep the overall open water area in mind, I wanted to bring in a comment from Scott, which I think you guys were chatting in the sidebar. Scott, you had a point about another kind of sensor that would be in the open water area?
Oh, well, this is Scott. Forgive me if I'm not up on all the activities stuff. Finding like I'm in remedial reading right now on what that is and how it's working. But I guess I really like the aerial monitoring stuff because I don't have to explain why you want to do it. And I feel like it's harder, the Koki and the spectrometer as well, actually, like require a lot more work in the front end to like pull people in. It's like, why do you want to, sit down at this desk and mess with this for a bunch of time? I think it's been more successful pulling people into the depth sensor just because we've had a lot of discussions about depth in New Orleans about flooding, but also because, you know, you don't have to explain what conductivity is. Like, you can just put the little wire in the jar and, you know, change the depth and it changes the noise, and it's like, oh, okay. And so I guess I've been trying, in regards to activities, I'm still trying to get people, I guess I'm trying to channel Phil Silva when I'm saying, like, you start with the end in mind and try to bring in at the beginning of that, of what I call the activity. I don't know, the beginning of the lesson, you present the photo or you present the result, you present something so that people know what they're spending their time working on. And I guess with the Koki, I don't know, that's just a comment. I found more success when it's depth, because I don't have to spend additional time explaining what conductivity is. But with all the activities, it's harder to get to the note and getting people to, like, write notes. And so I'm trying to think of ideas, a way to start with that end in mind, so people are writing about whatever it is.
Yeah, it would be interesting to think about, and this is a couple of years ago, Public Lab did that big push to do aerial mapping activities in, like, all of the different cities and regions.
I remember that March Mapping Madness.
It was super fun.
Someone must have come up with that silly name. Hi, Stevie.
But one of the things that having the activity grids as a kind of framework potentially allows Public Lab to do is to run kind of formal challenges. Like, what are the different things that you're testing with the Koki? What are the different things that you're using your depth sensor? If you're using, is the depth sensor on the riffle? I don't remember. But, like, what are the different things that you're using your depth sensor to look at? And that would also be a way, like, once the kind of infrastructure around replication and activity grids is built, it becomes a lot easier to kind of run those kind of synchronized pushes in a way that gives people an avenue to, like, replicate an activity and have a reason to do it, which would be cool.
Yeah, that's an important note. Oh, go ahead, Patrick.
Sorry, I was going to say, speaking to having the end in mind of why to write the research note, with the activity, I kind of like that it makes it clear that the reason why you're doing it is to add your voice and say, hey, me too, I was able to do this. And then there's more confidence for other people that are coming to that. I do think it's really interesting, like Katie said, that the conductivity sensor doesn't appeal to people down when you are. Because where I'm from, we're all interested in it. And I gave a poster presentation about this just this weekend. And people were like, this is great. We can finally measure snow melt, like, everywhere. So I think it's normal maybe for, they were really interested in depth too, by the way. Like, we can measure how much water is going through. But I think it's interesting that there are those regional differences between what people are interested in. I do think, though,
Patrick, I think probably most people know, but what region are you in?
So I'm in the Mid-Atlantic region in Maryland.
Okay, great.
But I do like that idea of having some kind of primer, like, this is why we're doing the activity. Like, building the Koki helps us measure water quality. So something like that.
Yeah, I mean, and they're, like, different, like, there's running the activity to run it, to familiarize yourself with the tool, and then there's running the activity to get a particular kind of information. And that is also kind of involves a set of practices around documentation that are going to be different based on what people are looking for. Like, if you're in Boston and you want to, like, look at how much salt is in your snow, how much road salt is, like, you know, you can go around and collect from different areas. Like, that might be really different from using the conductivity sensor to look at, you know, minerals and streams, or, and there's, like, building up practices around documentation that aren't just practices around, like, documenting the tool, but also practices around how do you document what you did and present your results are really important. Because whatever people are looking for, people do in fact want the wider world to take their work seriously and to take public lab tools seriously, and having a context where people can practice and think about what good documentation practices are it's like a really important piece of that's easy to overlook, because we think that like kind of running the experiment or running the project is like the most important thing, but actually like being able to write it up cohesively is also really important. And activities provide a way to do that. And there's kind of multiple ways to come at it too, because there are multiple different audiences that you want to bring in.
You know, just to respond to one small point on what you just said, the reason that we have, I think a part of how we got from the endless undifferentiated stream of research notes to the idea of clear activities and replications of those activities was actually through working with Catherine earlier this year, calling you out, Catherine, for doing so many classroom exercises with students in response to a lesson plan that was also posted on Public Lab. That web working group created this system where responses to a research note could be affiliated and grouped together. And about 6 months later, that grew into the activity grid. So it was always about educators. Anyways, I'm afraid I cut somebody off though. Did I cut Jeff off?
Well, I had a hand up for a while, but I was going to say that distinction between replicating the construction of a tool and replicating the use of a technique, is a really important one. I love that one. I really see those as being two distinct activities, in the sense that the first one, Catherine, I just did it like this. It's a new system we've added on the website.
I got some other hand raising systems.
Yeah, hand raising. Sorry, no, there's no button. And I think it relates a bit to, there was a post about like different kinds of activities, ones that are testing a technique to confirm that it works or verify that it works, versus one where you're testing the use of that technique in the field for a particular purpose. So, I mean, for example, if you wanted to do a test and learn something about road salt, it might make sense to do a test that tests your technique first, right? To confirm that your technique actually works before you begin to apply it to answer an unknown. So, that's why in the Koki, there's the one where you test salt water, or you test like potato chips in water. You test things that are conductive, that are going to trigger the sensor in order to confirm that it works. And then perhaps from there, you might move on to the next activity, which is, given that you have a sensor that you've put through its paces, so to speak, and then you can begin using it to identify unknowns. And I think also there's that question of easy and hard. To me, the easy and hard thing wasn't so much about whether it actually is easy, although of course that's important. I think part of it is actually that there's a sequencing to them. So the reason that a lot of them are listed as easy right now is that we've spent a lot of extra effort trying to get people to produce, edit, and reshape their activities, the easy ones first, so that there's a clear starting point. And as more activities are made and more past content is reformatted as activities, and as more things are sort of just generally posted, we'll fill that out. And we'll sort of bridge the gap, as we've mentioned a couple times on this call, between the onboarding, the introductory activities that we want lots of people to do and we want very high confidence in, versus the sort of leading edge of research, which is things that are unknown, things that are just being added, early drafts, things that are that require a lot of prerequisites. Any activity that requires if there's one that's testing road salt, maybe it should say at the top of it,
you should probably try this other activity first that's testing a known. So I think it's going to be interesting how these all grow into each other and how they begin to sequence, because that's where, instead of, as it used to be the case in public lab, you're just constantly, and it is mostly still the case in public lab, you're bombarded with the latest work that everyone's done. The idea is that you could work your way up through other activities that other people have done and have sort of trailblazed a bit, and you're really adding value because you're replicating, you're building confidence in those, and you're approaching the leading edge.
This is Catherine. Oops.
I'm going to say Stevie and Matthew are here also.
Hi, guys.
Wait, Scott, do it again.
He's not no. Wow, he's a holdout. All right, Catherine.
No, I was just gonna say I want to just like plus one the idea of documenting the applications of these tools as well, because that's like a whole other area of expertise that I felt like we, at least in the class, we've had to bring in sort of separately as well. So like we kind of like worked on building in how do we build the cookie, but then we are also thinking about, well, what are the applications of the cookie? And so in the class context, at least, I brought in Patrick Heron, who's from the Mystic River watershed, as a guest, and who would like come in and talk about the Mystic River watershed and talk about what kind of contaminants there are and the history and like why it matters, basically. And so and I agree with what Scott was saying. Like there is a lot of scaffolding that has to go into the cookie. So it's actually like pretty complicated. like you have to like explain electronics, you have to explain conductivity. I'm trying to introduce to them this idea of participating in an open source. I feel like it all hangs together, but this happens over the course of like 4 separate classes. It's kind of like there's a lot of scaffolding that goes into them being ramped up on both like the application and why it matters, and then also like actually building the tool. But then one last thing I was going to say about the research notes is what you were saying was about, I mean, I have the luxury, when you teach in that very formal context, you have the luxury of merit that they do research notes, but I feel like there's actually a pedagogical reason for that, and the pedagogical reason is about collaborative peer knowledge sharing. So it's, the learning is not just how to build a tool, the learning is also how do I contribute my knowledge and articulate my knowledge to a group of other people and try to learn from them as well. So like, I don't know to the extent that people can basically force others to write research notes, but I do think there's like some sound pedagogical reasons.
That's great, Catherine.
I was going to say I like that as well. I think even simply to clearly articulate and ask that people do activities is more than we have clearly done in the past at Public Lab. So I think that there's going to be a lot of like instead of just, hey, start learning and like catch up if you can, and then participate at.
Let's blame that on, I think we're all good. I think it's Jeff who froze.
It looks so important.
Wait, let's all act like Jeff.
Anybody else?
Actually, I wanted to Catherine's point, and I've missed like a lot of this conversation, but this is something I was just thinking about on the plane over, was just the idea that we have a lot of people on Public Lab who are offline and doing a lot of real Public Lab work on the ground. We've been thinking a lot about how either to lower the barrier or the bar so that they feel more comfortable in participating, or if it's like other things that are going on that we need to create a better system for feeding back about what the kinds of things they're doing. And like the specific example I'm talking about is like community groups. I just had a conversation with Olga with the Coalition to Ban Petco, and she's almost entirely offline
but she's had all these great public lab projects. So in a sense, she's done a lot of replication in terms of like balloon mapping and things like that, but it doesn't live on public lab unless like somebody helps her get it up there. And so I'm just trying to think a little bit about how in this system, like someone like her could see herself fitting in, or if there's something else that we need to do to like help account for the work that she's doing and getting that up, even, if that's the end goal for her. So just another thought. Scott.
What are her barriers to putting stuff online? Like, is it internet access?
No, like honestly, it's a lot about just time and comfort with the web interface, and just not really like, I think, yeah, she was telling me, so she's working with lawyers and all these other people, and a lot of the work that she has to do is physically meet with people, and it takes so much time. She's starting like a door knocking campaign in the next week. And so when she meets with a lawyer, like instead of being in front of her computer, she says she actually just does better if she spits things out at people, and they can work on that. And it's like, I'm not sure that this type of system could help accommodate for something like that, but that's the kind of person that I'm thinking about on Public Lab. It's like making sure that those resources are available to her, and that she has the least, it's easiest for her to participate in the way that she would want to. So I think it's kind of a different angle than like, but
yeah.
I don't know.
Scott, can you get off mute and say what you said in chat, and then after that, Patrick?
Well, yeah, that's a common thing. I'm not often working in a pedagogical space. I'm often hello?
Hey, can you just say that again? Let me read your question out. Scott typed, okay. Do we need a public lab journalism crew to document offline replication and applications of techniques? Or scribes, Scott asks, going medieval. And then Patrick chimes in, video posts.
I don't know. I think.
Well, I was going to say, when I think about, it's hard to get people to participate when they're doing so many in-person activities.
Yeah.
And the documentation is really useful for us, but how useful is it for the person doing the documentation? I think is the question. And so, how does someone's work on Public Lab serve their own advocacy? So when they're doing publications on Public Lab, it's not just so that they can share back a replication for the people who help them learn an activity, which is great for us, but not necessarily immediately useful for that person. So how does Public Lab as a publication platform or create a place to aggregate information, share information in a way that assists someone in advocacy who is time?
I wondered that a lot. I feel like from the earliest days of wanting to be a network, the kind of place where people working on the same issue from across different regions would meet, be able to see each other's work, would be learning from each other, would be finding support networks, because often like activists feel isolated. I'm wondering, is it, are we getting anywhere close to achieving it? Is it not possible? Is it, and then just to connect with all the questions you guys brought up about like time and value. I don't know.
From what Stevie was saying earlier, checking in with somebody offline and finding out what they were doing, that sounds like it was a very important part of bringing that work into the network of people who would be interested in seeing what her methods are. And if she's the kind of person, if there's other kinds of people that would rather just spit things out, maybe leveraging something like a YouTube video or something like that would be a way for them to spend 5 minutes of their time just explaining verbally what they're doing. And then if somebody else is interested, they can translate those things into a public lab research note, kind of like Scott was thinking. What about that?
Sorry, this is Katie here. I think it's also true that, or worth thinking about ways that public lab can benefit people even if they never participate in the online community. I mean, and this is potentially less true from an advocacy perspective than it is from, say, a teaching perspective. From a teaching perspective, it's entirely possible to use public lab extensively without ever writing a research note. And having a lot of work and energy and effort go into building up documentation is every bit as useful for someone who's trying to replicate activities, even if all they do is replicate the activities and they don't post it. Like, we want them to post it. It's better for us if they post it, but for them, it might not actually make a difference. And that seems potentially like it could be true in kind of activist advocate settings, because part of where like knowledge, like discursive knowledge, can be pooled, and where that knowledge is made available, like that's useful. That's useful even if people only interact with it kind of from on the receiving side of it. And I know that's not ideal, but it's I mean, it's worth keeping in mind.
Great. Well, we're coming up on the last 5 minutes of our call. I wonder, does anyone want to circle back to a previous topic? I personally definitely have a pin in the idea of like, what all does the overall open water area need to be updated to say? Yeah, question coming in from Pupsterbauer, pardon the pronunciation. Here's a question. Have you chosen the 555 chip for the Koki instead of a physical computing platform like Arduino to avoid having to have additional programming skills, or because of cost reasons? Sasha. Thanks, Sasha. Does anyone want to take that question?
I mean, I think both are true. I don't actually know exactly how the Koki came to be. I didn't get the sense that there was like that much forward thinking in it. It's certainly great that you don't have to know how to code in order to use it, and it's great that it's so cheap. And those are both really like motivating factors in its favor. Yeah, and it's like very easy to replicate. There's a lot of documentation about 555 circuits, but I feel like maybe it just I would love to kind of hear more about how much intentional planning went into developing the tool and how much it was just kind of like, oh, this is cool and we can use it for these reasons. I don't actually know.
I know that when Don had picked that part, I mean, one of the reasons was that you needed an AC signal, so you needed an oscillation above and below 0 volts, and that requires some extra electronics to do with an Arduino. So you just kind of picked it as an easy, accessible, available signal generator.
I think to add on to that, there are people that are definitely trying to use physical computing platforms like the Riffle, which is based on Arduino, to do just that, to measure conductivity and log it. So the way I see the two is the Koki is something that you can spend a few dollars on, and it's measuring conductivity. Isn't that cool? You can see if this is more than that. And which is great. And you can use that as a platform for what are the other ways that we can measure conductivity with similar technologies and with increasing precision.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I see the two dividing as well. I mean, I think of the Koki as a more educational project, as like kind of a good on-ramp, but then I'm not sure, I mean, based on concerns from Don, and I think there's been some of the discussion on the water quality list, like I'm not sure one would actually want to like deploy Kokis to do some kind of more systematic measurement, but I think they're a great intro to then potentially more systematic things. Like they're a great way to introduce the concepts of conductivity and so on. And to get something up and running really quickly and to have it make a cool sound. And like as far as I think the original thing behind the Coqui was like, can we translate conductivity or these various other parameters into sound? Like that was something that Don was exploring when he was making that. So it wasn't like originally planned, like, oh, we're gonna use this for this purpose or not. It was more of like, oh, let's try this one-off thing. And then it sort of worked, and there was something really amazing about like, there's something really lovely. It's kind of like when you write your first program or you make an LED light up, you're just like, it makes this little sound, and it's really awesome. So there's something really charming about it that sort of, I think, stuck around.
Yeah, and I think the activity grids also provide, like they provide an incentive to think about, okay, like, well, how does the Coqui connect to other projects? What are new projects that could be developed that kind of do similar things on the same track? And also, like, there is no, like, if you are more comfortable coding, like, how would you do this project with an Arduino, or how would you do this project, on a digital platform? And that's, the more we can kind of create environments where people are prompted to do that, I think the richer the like talk environment around each project becomes, and the easier it is to see the gaps.
Okay, great. Patrick.
Yeah, I do have one other thing on the idea of activity grids, and I'm looking at the Coqui activity page right now, and I was just wondering, what kinds of ideas do you have going forward for cleaning it up and making it look like even easier to get on board with, get attracted to? Because right now, to me, it's a lot of the titles start out the same, like Coqui PCB and like Coqui BBV 1.0, and it's kind of overwhelming at first to see this big list of activities. And I was wondering if you all had thought about maybe having sections, like this is just building it out, and like these are different things you can measure with it, and for things to be broken up in subheadings, maybe as a way of having a more clear path, like Jeff was saying, like first we're going to start with this one, and then we're going to have these, and then you can graduate to these down here, something like that.
It looks like Jeff dropped off the call, but I guess I wasn't part of the working group to kind of think about this at first, and we have thought about sections and the need to make sure that like the clearest, simplest, like first steps to getting going are always right at the top. But it's something we should kick around. We should, if you wanted to post a question and we can all weigh in, figure it out.
Okay, so like, where would be the right place to talk about activity grids on the site?
If you wanted to use the comments in one of the original blog posts about it, or just start a new question, kind of like I started a question on like, hey, what do we need to be considering when using the word replication, or even promoting replication as the mode of getting started in public lab projects? I just posted it at publiclab.org/questions.
Okay.
Another thing, I don't know that this would work, but like sometimes like there's a difference between when you're writing to just document something that you did, which I think of as a lot of the research. It's like, okay, I did it.
Hey, Catherine, hold on. Could you check your mic? It just went quiet. You're on. Oh no. Try again. We can't hear you.
It was just really sudden.
Oh, like something just happened.
Oh, you're on mute right now.
Yeah, she's turning it on and off.
Can you see if the physical microphone is still there?
My computer.
There we go.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
so weird.
okay.
I was just turning it on and off. Okay. What was I saying? Oh yeah, I mean, I don't know in the activity grid if it might be, you might be able to distinguish. I mean, I don't know if it'd be useful, but like sometimes there are research notes that are written about just I did a thing and like here was my test or whatever. And then that's sometimes different than writing for others to do your thing, you know? So like, you know, like you might want to distinguish between like, here's a tutorial that somebody has written for others to get started versus like, oh, I'm experimenting and I'm kind of quickly jotting down some notes. So like that might be another, I don't know if enough things fall into those categories to differentiate them like that, but like that might be another way to differentiate them because like the tutorials, even if they're at different levels, might be easier for people to like get their mind around, and then they can dive into the more like I did a thing and then try to do the thing that that person did or whatever. Does that make sense? And then, oh wait, I was going to say one other thing about activity grids. Oh yeah, how do you find them on the site? I can't find them.
Oh, like you want to see all the pages that have one on there?
Yeah, or even just find the cookie one. I can't find it. Like I have to like search around on the site to try to like figure out where it is. Can it
Yeah, I
be?
had a similar problem. I couldn't
Okay,
find
there's
it
not a
either.
good system yet. Fair.
Wait,
Right now,
Okay.
it's the what?
well, it's a tool page eventually, right?
Yeah, everything, this is sort of like an under construction area, but right now, any page with an activities grid will have a power tag that says activities : something.
Okay.
And then the co-key one, the co-key activities grid is literally on publiclab.org/wiki/co-key.
Yeah. But if I'm like navigating,
Yeah, they have, that's sort of the new, this hopefully additional way of scaffolding around the site. It hasn't like tunneled its way up to either the menus nor the front page.
sure, that
And
makes
so that's sort of a phase that's starting now.
okay.
Your idea is welcome.
Cool. Yeah, I was just thinking like some way to find those. Because I mean, actually, I'd be like interested for the other tools too. Like, I mean, I know you guys maybe haven't created that, but like I'd be interested for the balloon mapping stuff as well as like what, because I sometimes do that in classes as well. So, but yeah, that's no problem. But it'd be great to have it so, because I think like the activity grid, it'd be great to they show up like right on the drop down menu, or it's the home page of that tool, or if it's the open water page, there's clear links out to it or something like that. So anyway.
To get back to that question of how making a quick I did this versus a tutorial might be kind of different.
Mm-hmm.
There is an open question to work on, which is how do we create resources within different research categories for people to quickly make their instructionals. So when you do a replication, how do you rapidly use the media someone used in theirs to edit that and add to it? How do you combine the media from several different replications, or the text from different replications, in a way that credits the original contributors, such that another replication is created? And those are open questions.
+1. Well, guys, it's just creeping past the hour here, so I'd love to wrap this up and keep the conversation going as much in the website as possible, but obviously we chat on our Google group still. Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for coming this hour, and see you guys next month.
Oh, kind of barn raising.
Oh, Stevie, sorry, I meant to ask if there. No, say.
No,
Just come to barn raising to Stevie. Okay, but Catherine's gonna be in Japan, so. Scott.
I'll raise a barn in Japan.
Oh, great. Sounds good.
Okay. Great. Good to meet you, Sasha. Coming in from chat. I appreciate it. And also, Pei, hope to talk to you next time. Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Come to Coca G.